She was invisible at her friend's wedding until Billionaire whispered, "Pretend you're mine tonight." Cassie felt the weight of every pitying glance as she sat alone at the reception table, the only single woman surrounded by dancing couples. Her mother's disappointed sigh still echoed from the ceremony. Then, a hand extended before her, and a voice like whiskey and sin murmured near her ear, "I need a favor. Act like you're mine tonight, and I promise you'll never feel invisible again." She looked up into Beck Armstrong's storm-gray eyes, and everything shifted. Cassie stared at that outstretched hand, her mind spinning. She recognized him instantly. Everyone in the room did. Beck Armstrong, the billionaire tech entrepreneur whose face graced business magazines and whose latest acquisition had made headlines just last week. But why was he standing before her, tall and impossibly handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, offering this absurd proposition? "I know this sounds strange," Beck said, his voice pitched low so only she could hear above the band's rendition of some romantic ballad. "But Miranda Wellington is here with her new fiancé, and she's making a spectacle. I need someone on my arm to show I've moved on, that her betrayal didn't destroy me." His gray eyes searched hers with unexpected vulnerability. "I chose you because you looked like the only authentic person in this room, and because you clearly need rescuing as much as I do." The words struck deeper than he probably intended. Cassie's gaze flickered to the dance floor where her childhood friend Jade Montgomery, now Jade Chen, swayed in her husband's arms, radiant in her wedding gown. Around them, couples moved in synchronized happiness that felt like a coordinated attack on Cassie's single status. Her best friend Kennedy Brooks had spent the cocktail hour gently suggesting Cassie mingle, code for, "Please stop looking so obviously alone." Even the elderly relatives had offered sympathetic head tilts that made Cassie want to crawl under the table. Worst of all had been her mother. During the ceremony, Tasha Nicholson had leaned over to whisper, "Your cousin Jennifer is engaged now. Even little Maya has a boyfriend." The implication hung heavy. At 34, Cassie Nicholson, successful senior marketing executive, owner of a beautiful apartment, respected in her field, was somehow failing at life because she attended weddings solo. "What's in it for me?" Cassie asked, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. She was an architect of narratives in her professional life, but her personal life felt like a building perpetually under construction, never quite finished. Beck's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Beyond saving you from more pitying looks, how about we both get through tonight without feeling like failures?" The honesty in his tone decided it for her. This wasn't a polished pickup line. This was one lonely person recognizing another. Cassie placed her hand in his. The moment their palms connected, awareness jolted through her, a current that traveled up her arm and settled low in her belly, warm and insistent. His hand was large, calloused in unexpected places for a man who lived in boardrooms. Strong fingers closed around hers as he pulled her to standing, and suddenly she was looking up at him, realizing he stood well over 6 feet. His broad shoulders blocked out the room behind him, creating a pocket of space that felt intimate despite the crowd. "I'm Cassie Nicholson," she said as he led her toward the dance floor. "Marketing executive. Jade and I were roommates in college." "Beck Armstrong," he replied, and there was no arrogance in his tone, just acknowledgement of the reality that his name carried weight. "I went to business school with Jade's husband, Thomas. Small world." As they reached the dance floor, a slow song began, because of course it did. The universe had a sense of humor tonight. Beck's hand settled on the small of her back, and even through the bronze silk of her dress, she felt the heat of his palm. Her fingers rested on his shoulder, and they began to move together. The synchronicity surprised her. Beck led with quiet confidence, his movements fluid despite his size. Cassie had taken ballroom dancing lessons years ago, one of those things single women do to put themselves out there. And she recognized skill when she felt it. They turned in slow circles, and she became hyper-aware of everything. The solid warmth of his chest inches from hers, the cedar and something darker scent of his cologne, the way his thumb traced absent patterns on her lower back that made her skin prickle with sensation. "Your mother is watching," Beck murmured, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. "She looks relieved." Cassie glanced toward the family table and found her mother's face transformed. The worry lines that had deepened over the past year, the ones that appeared whenever Tasha looked at her unmarried daughter, had smoothed. Her mother was actually smiling, nodding approvingly at something Cassie's aunt was saying. "Why me?" Cassie asked as they turned again. The question felt important. "There are dozens of women here, prettier women. Women more your type." Beck's jaw tightened and his hand pressed more firmly against her back, pulling her incrementally closer. "You looked like you understood what it feels like to be surrounded by people and still invisible." His voice carried an ache she recognized in her own chest. "Like you're watching everyone else live the life you're supposed to want, wondering why you can't seem to get there." The accuracy of his observation stole her breath. "I do," she admitted quietly. "Know that feeling." His storm-gray eyes met hers, and something passed between them, recognition, understanding, a connection that felt too substantial for two strangers swaying to music at someone else's wedding. "Then we're helping each other." "Tonight," Beck said. "No pretense between us, just two people getting through an evening that's harder than it should be." Over Beck's shoulder, Cassie spotted the woman who had to be Miranda Wellington. Stunning in the way that came from a lifetime of privilege and professional grooming, she wore an emerald dress that probably cost more than Cassie's monthly rent. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant updo, and diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. Her hand rested possessively on the arm of a distinguished silver-haired man, but her attention was entirely on Beck, eyes narrowed with something that looked like predatory calculation. "Is that her?" Cassie asked. "Miranda?" "Don't look," Beck said immediately, his voice hardening. "Let her wonder." Cassie made a decision born of empathy and perhaps a touch of recklessness. She slid her hand from his shoulder to the back of his neck, fingers threading through the dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. She felt him go rigid beneath her touch, every muscle tensing. "If we're going to sell this," Cassie whispered, "we need to look convincing." For a heartbeat, Beck didn't move. Then the tension in his body shifted, transformed into something else entirely. His neck relaxed under her fingers, and he pulled her closer still until they were dancing in a way that definitely violated traditional social distance. "You're good at this," he murmured, but there was a question threading through his words. "I'm really not," Cassie admitted, hyper-aware of how her body aligned with his, how her curves fit against the solid planes of his chest and abdomen. "I haven't been anyone's date in 3 years. Haven't had a man look at me like I was desirable rather than impressive in longer than that." Beck's response was to tilt his head so his cheek brushed her temple. To anyone watching, they looked like lovers lost in their own world. To Cassie, it felt like standing too close to a fire, dangerous and irresistible in equal measure. "Then they're fools," Beck said quietly. "You're stunning." The compliment landed differently than the professional praise she was used to receiving. This wasn't about her quarterly numbers or her award-winning campaigns. This was about her. Cassie, the woman who'd spent 2 hours on her hair, who'd chosen this dress because it made her feel beautiful, even though society sent mixed messages about her curves, who'd applied makeup like war paint to face another event alone. The song ended, but they remained standing close, neither quite ready to break the spell. Then a voice cut through the moment like glass shattering. "Beck, darling, you didn't mention you were seeing someone." Miranda Wellington materialized beside them, and up close she was even more intimidating. Her beauty was the kind that opened doors and closed mouths, the kind that made other women feel inadequate by proximity. Her smile was all veneered teeth and no warmth as her gaze raked over Cassie with thinly veiled assessment. "I don't report my personal life to you, Miranda," Beck said, his voice turning to ice. "Not anymore." Miranda's laugh was crystalline and sharp. "Of course not. I'm just surprised, that's all." Her eyes traveled deliberately from Cassie's natural hair, styled in twists that had taken hours, down to her bronze heels. "How unexpected. I didn't realize you'd expanded your preferences." The racist undertone wasn't even subtle. It landed like a slap, and Cassie felt her face grow hot. She'd encountered this brand of bigotry countless times, in boardrooms where she was the only black woman, at industry events where people expressed surprise at her credentials, in everyday interactions where her competence was perpetually questioned. But it never stopped stinging. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't cause a scene at Jade's wedding, Beck moved. He shifted his body slightly, positioning himself between Cassie and Miranda in a gesture that was protective without being patronizing. His arm wrapped around Cassie's waist, pulling her against his side, and she felt the tremor of controlled anger running through him. "Cassie is everything you never were, Miranda," Beck said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Authentic." He guided Cassie away without another word, his hand firm on her waist, steering them through the crowd and out onto a terrace strung with lights. The moment the glass doors closed behind them, muffling the reception noise, Beck exhaled roughly. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, releasing her and running a hand through his hair. "Miranda has always been—" He struggled for words that wouldn't sound crude. "Cruel?" Cassie supplied, leaning against the stone balustrade. The evening air was cool against her heated skin, and she welcomed the sensation. "Racist? Threatened by women she perceives as competition?" Beck nodded, his expression grim. "All of that. I should have warned you before dragging you into this." Cassie studied him in the soft glow of the string lights. His jaw was tight, his hands shoved into his pockets like he didn't trust what they might do otherwise. He looked genuinely distressed by Miranda's behavior, and something about that mattered. "I've dealt with women like her my entire career," she said, hearing the bitterness seep into her voice despite her best efforts. "The ones who think they're complimenting you by saying you're articulate or surprisingly accomplished, who ask if you're in the right meeting room or assume you're someone's assistant rather than the executive." Beck's eyes found hers, and the understanding there made her throat tighten. "It shouldn't be like that," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have to armor yourself just to exist in professional spaces." "But I do," Cassie said simply. "Every single day. So Miranda? She's just more of the same, except she doesn't even pretend to be polite about it." Beck pulled off his tuxedo jacket and stepped closer, draping it over her shoulders before she registered that she'd started shivering. "You're cold." His hands lingered on her shoulders as he adjusted the jacket, and Cassie caught his scent embedded in the fabric. Cedar and expensive wool, and something uniquely him. She turned to thank him, and suddenly they were face to face, close enough that she could see flecks of silver in his gray eyes, close enough to count the faint lines at the corners of his mouth. Neither of them moved away. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility. "Thank you," Cassie managed, her voice emerging softer than intended, "for tonight, for making me feel—" She couldn't quite articulate it. The sensation of being chosen, of being visible, of having someone position themselves between her and casual cruelty. "Visible?" Beck supplied, echoing his earlier promise. His hand lifted, fingers hovering near her face, and she saw him wrestling with whether to close that distance. Whatever conclusion he reached made his hand drop. "We should go back inside," he said, but he didn't move. Neither did she. The moment stretched, taut as a wire, until Kennedy appeared at the terrace doors, waving frantically. "Cassie, bouquet toss in 5 minutes." Her best friend's voice carried a note of determination. Kennedy had clearly decided that tonight was the night Cassie's romantic luck would change. The spell broke. Beck stepped back, and Cassie immediately missed his warmth, the sense of being sheltered that she rarely allowed herself to feel. "Duty calls," she said with a lightness she didn't feel. Inside, Kennedy physically pushed Cassie into the cluster of single women despite her protests. "You're participating," Kennedy insisted, her tone brooking no argument. "Who knows? Maybe tonight's your night." Jade stood on a small platform, her wedding bouquet raised high. Her face glowed with happiness, and when her eyes found Cassie's, she winked. "Ready, ladies?" she called out. The bouquet sailed through the air in a perfect arc. Too perfect. Cassie didn't even have to reach for it. The flowers landed in her hands as if magnetized, and the room erupted in cheers. Heat flooded Cassie's face. She hated being the center of attention like this, hated the assumption that catching flowers somehow predicted her romantic future. But then she caught Beck's gaze across the room. He stood near the bar, a glass of what looked like whiskey in his hand, and he was smiling. Not smirking, not the polite smile of social obligation, a real smile that softened the harsh angles of his face and made her stomach flutter. Her mother materialized at her elbow, practically vibrating with excitement. "Cassie, who is that handsome man you were dancing with? He couldn't take his eyes off you." For the first time in recent memory, Tasha's voice carried hope rather than worry. "Is he someone special?" "Just a friend, Mama," Cassie deflected, but her eyes remained on Beck. "Well, he doesn't look at you like just a friend," her mother said knowingly. "That man looks at you like you're the only woman in the room." As the reception wound down and guests began filtering out, Cassie collected her clutch from the table, mentally preparing for the solo drive home. She'd done her duty, survived another wedding, even caught the bouquet in some cosmic joke. Tomorrow she'd return to her regularly scheduled life of professional success and personal emptiness. "Can I drive you home?" She turned to find Beck standing there, his jacket slung over one arm since she'd returned it when they came back inside. His expression was carefully neutral, but his body language said he'd already decided he wasn't letting her leave alone. "This was supposed to be pretend," Cassie reminded him, but her voice lacked conviction. "A favor between strangers." Beck stepped closer, and the air between them became charged again, crackling with the same energy that had hummed through their dance. "Maybe I don't want to pretend anymore tonight." His thumb brushed along her jawline, the touch feather-light but sending sparks across her skin. Cassie's eyes fluttered closed at the sensation, and when she opened them, his eyes had darkened to smoke. "One drink," she heard herself say, the words emerging before her practical brain could veto them. "At my place, to properly thank you for being my fake boyfriend for the evening." Beck's smile was slow and devastating, transforming his face from handsome to something that should be illegal. "Your place, one drink, nothing pretend about that." Have you ever felt invisible in a crowded room, like Cassie did at that wedding reception, wondering if anyone truly sees you? Have you ever wanted someone to choose you, not out of obligation but genuine desire? Tell me your story in the comments, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you're already feeling the pull of Beck and Cassie's connection. As they walked to his car, a sleek charcoal sedan that probably cost more than Cassie's annual salary, she caught sight of her reflection in the glass doors. For the first time in years, she didn't see the polished professional mask she wore daily. She saw herself the way Beck seemed to, beautiful, desirable, chosen. The thought was intoxicating and terrifying. The drive to Cassie's apartment hummed with anticipation. Beck's hand rested on the gear shift, and she found herself hyper-aware of how close it was to her knee, how the smallest movement would bring them into contact. They talked as the city lights streaked past, really talked in a way that felt strange and necessary. Beck told her about building his company from nothing after his family lost everything when he was 19. His father had been a contractor whose business partner embezzled funds, leaving the Armstrong family bankrupt. Beck had worked construction during the day and coded at night, sleeping 4 hours if he was lucky, driven by the memory of his mother crying over bills she couldn't pay. He'd built Armstrong Technologies into a billion-dollar enterprise through sheer stubbornness and an almost pathological work ethic. Cassie shared her own journey, the exhaustion of being the only black woman in most boardrooms, the constant pressure to be twice as good to receive half the recognition, the way she'd learned to code switch between her family and her professional world. She'd switched from architecture to marketing because she'd loved the storytelling aspect of buildings more than the technical work, but also because she'd grown tired of having her designs questioned while less qualified. White men's ideas sailed through approval. "It's lonely," Beck said quietly as he pulled into her building's parking lot. "Isn't it? Success. Everyone thinks achieving it solves everything, but it just creates different problems, different isolation." "Yes," Cassie breathed, relieved to hear someone else articulate the feeling. Exactly that. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a renovated historic building in a neighborhood that was gentrifying rapidly, for better or worse. She'd bought it 5 years ago when she could barely afford the down payment, betting on her career trajectory. Now the investment had paid off financially, but she still felt like an outsider among her wealthier neighbors. Beck followed her inside, and she saw her home through his eyes, modest compared to where he probably lived, but filled with personality. Architectural sketches lined the walls, some her own abandoned designs, others from artists she admired. Plants thrived on every windowsill, testimony to the care she lavished on living things when she had so few people to nurture. Books stacked on surfaces, spines cracked from rereading, because Cassie believed in returning to stories that spoke to her soul. "You're an architect?" Beck asked, studying a detailed rendering of a community center she'd designed in graduate school. "Was," Cassie corrected, moving to her small kitchen to pour wine. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for glasses. "I switched to marketing when I realized I loved the narrative aspect of buildings more than the technical execution. Why people chose to inhabit certain spaces, how design influenced emotion and behavior." She turned to find Beck had followed her into the kitchen. The space was tiny, barely room for two people, and suddenly he seemed enormous. His presence filled the area, making her hyper-aware of his proximity, the way his eyes tracked her movements. As she handed him the wine glass, their fingers brushed. The touch sent electricity up her arm, sharper than the earlier contact on the dance floor. She saw the same awareness flash in his eyes, acknowledgement that whatever existed between them wasn't her imagination. Beck set the glass down on the counter without drinking, his gaze locked on hers. Cassie. Just her name, but laden with question and promise and barely restrained want. She should step back. This man was a billionaire who'd needed her for appearances tonight. Tomorrow he'd return to his world of penthouse apartments and society galas and women who looked like Miranda Wellington. But his eyes were asking permission, and every nerve in her body was screaming yes. "Beck," she whispered back, and it was all the invitation he needed. He crossed the space between them in one stride, his hand cupping her face with surprising gentleness for such large hands. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and Cassie's breath caught. "Tell me to stop," Beck murmured, his mouth hovering near hers. "Tell me this is a terrible idea, and I'll leave right now." Instead, Cassie closed the remaining distance, pressing her lips to his. The kiss started tentative, questioning, exploring. His mouth was warm and firm, tasting of the whiskey he'd had at the reception. Cassie's hands slid up his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt, and looped around his neck. The moment her fingers threaded through his hair, something shifted. The kiss deepened, became hungry, almost desperate. Beck's control frayed as his hands skimmed down her sides, learning her curves through bronze silk. His palms settled on her hips, and he pulled her flush against him, eliminating all space between their bodies. Cassie made a sound low in her throat, and Beck swallowed it, kissing her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning. They stumbled out of the kitchen, lips never separating, shedding items as they went. His bow tie landed on her couch. Her shoes kicked off somewhere near the hallway. By the time they reached her bedroom, Cassie's fingers were fumbling with the buttons of his shirt, while his hands found the zipper of her dress. Beck laid her on the bed as if she were precious, and the reverence in his touch made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. In the dim light filtering through her curtains from the street lamps outside, he traced the curve of her shoulder with his fingertips, following the line down to where her dress had begun to slip. "You're stunning," he murmured against her collarbone, his voice rough. "I couldn't stop looking at you all night. The way you moved, the way you laughed with your friends, the way you looked at me like I wasn't a bank account with a pulse." His honesty undid something in her chest. "I felt invisible until you asked me to dance," Cassie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I was taking up space at someone else's celebration. Then you appeared, and suddenly I felt seen." Beck's hands stilled. He pulled back to look at her face, and the raw emotion in his expression stole what remained of her breath. His fingers traced the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, the column of her throat, learning her features like he was memorizing them. "I see you," he said quietly, and it felt like a vow. Chapter 2. He kissed her again, slower this time, more deliberate, his hands. Worshipped rather than took, trailing along her arms, across her stomach, down her thighs, each touch deliberate and reverent. Cassie found herself responding with an openness that terrified her, pulling him closer, eliminating the last barriers between them. When Beck's hand slid up her thigh, beneath the silk of her dress, Cassie gasped. His touch was fire against her skin, awakening nerves she'd forgotten existed. But as his fingers traced higher, reality crashed through the haze of desire. This was happening too fast. She barely knew this man beyond tonight's performance. Tomorrow, everything would look different in harsh daylight. She'd be the woman who brought a stranger home from a wedding, and he'd be the billionaire who'd needed a prop for an evening. "Wait," Cassie breathed, her hand covering his. "Beck, wait." He stopped immediately, pulling back to search her face. Concern replaced desire in his expression. "Too much?" His voice was rough but controlled, and she could see the effort it took for him to check himself. Cassie nodded, suddenly fighting tears she didn't fully understand. "I don't do this. I don't bring men home from weddings. I don't fall into bed with strangers, no matter how—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Beck pulled her into his arms, holding her as tremors ran through her body. "We don't have to do anything," he said quietly, his hand stroking her hair. "I just want to hold you, if that's okay." The offer was so unexpected, so tender, that Cassie's careful control cracked. She buried her face in his neck and let herself feel everything she usually kept locked away. The loneliness, the exhaustion of always being strong, the bone-deep desire to be wanted for herself rather than her accomplishments. "I'm tired," she whispered against his skin. So tired of being seen as successful Cassie, capable Cassie, independent Cassie. The woman men admire professionally but never pursue romantically. Like I'm too much, too smart, too accomplished, too black, too curvy to be someone's first choice. Beck's arms tightened around her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "Miranda left me at the altar." The confession hung in the air between them. Cassie pulled back to look at his face, seeing the vulnerability there. 2 years ago, Beck continued, his voice flat with the kind of control that came from repeatedly telling a painful story. The wedding was supposed to be the social event of the season. 500 guests, symphony orchestra, imported flowers, the works. She waited until everyone was seated in the church, including my parents, who'd mortgaged their house to help pay for their portion despite my protests. Then she sent her maid of honor to the altar to tell me she'd realized she deserved someone with proper breeding to match her family name. Cassie's hand found his, fingers intertwining. "Beck, the tabloids had a field day," he said with a bitter smile. "Photos of me standing alone at the altar. Made every gossip site. Think pieces about whether new money could ever really fit into old society. My business took a hit because suddenly my judgment was questioned. If I couldn't see a gold digger coming, could I be trusted with investors' money?" Understanding washed through Cassie. They were two people wounded by being seen as categories rather than individuals. She'd been rejected for not fitting the narrow definition of desirable. He'd been rejected for not meeting outdated standards of pedigree. Different wounds, same underlying message. You're not enough. "I'm sorry," Cassie said quietly. "That's cruel beyond measure." Beck's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I thought I loved her. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of her, the proof that I'd made it, that the kid who wore thrift store clothes could marry into one of the oldest families in the city. I was performing a role, just like tonight. Except tonight, he looked at her, really looked at her. Tonight felt real." "It did," Cassie agreed, the admission feeling dangerous and necessary. "Stay," she whispered, making a decision that felt both reckless and right. "Just hold me. Don't leave." Beck shifted on the bed, settling beside her and pulling her back against his chest. His arm wrapped around her waist, and Cassie felt his warmth seep into her body. They lay tangled together, her dress wrinkled, his shirt half unbuttoned, neither sleeping nor speaking. Physical desire remained, humming beneath the surface, but this felt more intimate, choosing vulnerability over performance, connection over consummation. Cassie felt Beck's breath even out behind her, his body relaxing incrementally. Just before she drifted into sleep, she felt him press a kiss to her shoulder. "Thank you," he murmured, "for seeing me too." Cassie woke to sunlight streaming through her curtains and the unfamiliar weight of a man's arm around her waist. For a disoriented moment, she didn't remember. Then everything flooded back. The wedding, Beck's proposition, the dance that felt like igniting something, the conversation that stripped them both bare. She turned carefully in Beck's embrace and found him still sleeping. In rest, the harsh lines of his face softened. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and there was something almost vulnerable about him like this. Cassie studied him in the quiet morning, this unexpected complication in her carefully ordered life, and felt something shift in her chest. His eyes opened, and for a heartbeat there was confusion before his gaze focused on her. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep, and the intimacy of the moment, rumpled and real in her bed, felt more exposing than anything they'd done last night. "Coffee?" Cassie offered, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't been even when they'd been kissing. She started to pull away, but Beck's arm tightened, keeping her close. "In a minute," he said, his free hand coming up to trace her face. "Let me just—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Cassie understood. "Let me memorize this. Let me hold on to this moment before reality intrudes." She settled back against him, and they lay there as morning brightened around them, neither quite ready to leave the bubble they had created. Eventually, necessity drove them from bed. Cassie made coffee in her tiny kitchen, while Beck stood at her living room window, looking out at the city waking below. Dressed in his wrinkled shirt and dress pants, he looked out of place in her modest apartment, and the visual reminder of their different worlds sent anxiety skittering through her chest. "Here," she said, handing him a mug. Their fingers brushed, and the spark of awareness was still there, undimmed by daylight. Beck took a sip, then pulled out his phone. His expression shifted as he scrolled through notifications, a shadow passing over his features. "We're already on social media," he said, showing her the screen. Cassie's stomach clenched. Someone had posted photos from the wedding, Beck and Cassie dancing, his jacket around her shoulders on the terrace, leaving together. The comments were a mix of supportive and vicious. Some gushed about Beck finally moving on. Others speculated about who she was. More than a few were racist in ways that made Cassie's skin crawl. "Who does she think she is?" one comment read. "Gold digger alert," said another. "I guess he's trying something different," a third offered with enough ambiguity to be insulting. "I'm sorry," Beck said immediately, his voice tight with anger. "This is what my life is like. Constant scrutiny. People thinking they have a right to comment on every choice I make." Cassie set down her coffee mug with careful precision. "Beck, last night was wonderful. But you live in a different world. You probably have an ex-beauty queen or supermodel waiting for your call, someone whose face fits expectations." Her voice stayed steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "I'm not naive. I know what I am. The interesting diversion, the night that made you feel real for a few hours." "Don't." Beck moved around the small kitchen table, tilting her chin up with gentle fingers. "Don't diminish what happened between us. I told you, I don't want pretend. Not with you." "But what does that even mean?" Cassie challenged, years of disappointment rising to the surface. "You go back to your penthouse and your business empire, and I go back to my life. We had a moment. Let's not ruin it by pretending it's more." Before Beck could respond, Cassie's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and grimaced. "My boss. There's probably a crisis." She answered, and within seconds her expression confirmed his guess. "The Henderson account? On Sunday?" She listened, her professional mask sliding into place. "I'll be there in 45 minutes. After she hung up, Beck didn't ask. He just said, "I'll drive you." "Your car is too conspicuous for my office parking lot," Cassie protested, but he was already grabbing his jacket. "Then I'll drop you a block away. But I'm not letting you go like this, with you thinking last night was just a pleasant diversion." His jaw was set with determination that probably served him well in boardrooms. The drive was quiet, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. When they reached her office building, Beck pulled into the lobby parking area despite her protests. The Sunday skeleton crew working security would definitely notice the expensive sedan. In the lobby, surrounded by corporate glass and steel, the goodbye felt awkward and insufficient. Beck's hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "Can I see you again? For real? Not for show?" Cassie's heart hammered against her ribs. Every practical instinct screamed to protect herself, to end this before the inevitable hurt. But his eyes held something that looked like hope, and she found herself unable to extinguish it. "I'd like that," she whispered. His kiss was brief but potent, leaving her dizzy as she headed to the elevator. She glanced back once and found him watching her, something unreadable in his expression. Over the following week, Beck texted constantly, not demanding or presumptuous, just present. How was your day? Did the Henderson crisis resolve? Random photos of things that reminded him of her, a bookstore window display, an architectural detail on a building, a sunset that painted the sky the same bronze as her dress. Cassie found herself smiling at her phone like a teenager, fingers hovering over her keyboard as she crafted responses that tried to sound casual while her heart performed acrobatics. Wednesday evening, they had dinner at a quiet restaurant where Beck had reserved a private room. Away from cameras and curious eyes, conversation flowed with the same ease as their night together. Beck asked about her architecture background, her family, the dreams she'd set aside when she switched careers. She learned about his sister Emma, who died at 16 from leukemia, the loss that drove his charitable foundation focused on pediatric cancer research. About his parents, who still lived in their modest home in the suburbs despite his repeated offers to relocate them somewhere more comfortable. About the imposter syndrome that dogged him in rooms full of people who'd inherited their wealth and looked down on those who'd built their own. "You hide it well," Cassie observed, watching candlelight play across his features. "The self-doubt. You project absolute confidence." "So do you," Beck countered, "but I see the way you brace yourself before entering rooms like you're preparing for battle. The way you track who's watching you, calculating whether they're assessing your competence or your appearance." The accuracy made her chest tighten. "It's exhausting," she admitted, "always being on guard, always having to prove I belong." Beck reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You shouldn't have to prove anything. Your presence should be enough." "Should be," Cassie agreed, "but isn't." Friday night, Cassie attended her company's annual fundraiser, a black tie affair at a downtown hotel. Beck had mentioned a business obligation that would keep him occupied, so she'd come solo. Her colleague Derek Chen stayed close through the cocktail hour, making her laugh with gossip about office politics and industry drama. They were at the bar, Derek ordering them both drinks, when Cassie felt the air shift. She turned and found Beck standing 3 feet away, impossibly elegant in a midnight tuxedo, his eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her skin flush. "Beck?" She couldn't hide her surprise. "I thought you had—" "I finished early," he interrupted, but his gaze had shifted to Derek. "Wanted to surprise you." The possessiveness in his voice sent heat pooling low in her belly. She introduced the men, watching testosterone-fueled politeness play out with barely concealed territorial instincts. Beck's hand settled on her lower back, claiming proprietary, and she felt the heat of his palm through the thin fabric of her dress. Derek retreated after pleasantries, citing someone he needed to speak with, and Cassie fought back a smile at the transparent excuse. "That was subtle," she murmured once they were alone. Beck's jaw tightened. "I didn't like how he was looking at you." "How was he looking at me?" Cassie challenged, enjoying his reaction more than she probably should. Beck leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Like he wanted what's mine." The declaration made her knees weaken. "I'm yours?" The question came out breathier than intended. His eyes darkened. "Aren't you?" Before she could answer, her brother Marcus appeared at her elbow. At 6'3" and built like the college linebacker he'd once been, Marcus cut an imposing figure. "Cassie," he said, his tone pleasant but his eyes assessing Beck with open suspicion, "introduce me to your friend." Cassie's stomach dropped. She'd successfully avoided family interrogation for the past week, but clearly her luck had run out. "Marcus, this is Beck Armstrong. Beck, my brother, Marcus Nicholson." The men shook hands, and Cassie could practically see them sizing each other up. "Armstrong," Marcus said slowly. "The tech billionaire. Interesting." "Can I speak with you?" Marcus asked Beck, phrasing it as a question while his tone made it a demand. "Privately?" Cassie started to protest, but Beck squeezed her hand. "It's fine." He followed Marcus to a quiet corner near the windows, and Cassie watched through the glass as her brother conducted what was clearly an interrogation. Marcus's arms were crossed, his expression severe. Beck's posture was straight, meeting whatever challenge Marcus posed with apparent calm. The conversation lasted 10 minutes, 10 excruciating minutes during which Cassie fielded questions from colleagues about her mystery man, while trying to read Marcus's body language for clues about how badly this was going. When they finally returned, Marcus's face was thoughtfully neutral. He kissed Cassie's forehead, a gesture from childhood that meant complicated things, and said simply, "He'll do," before leaving without further explanation. Beck looked shaken. "Your brother is terrifying," he said once Marcus was out of earshot. Despite her anxiety, Cassie laughed. "What did he say?" Beck's expression sobered. "That if I hurt you, there's nowhere I can hide. Also that I need to understand what it means to love a black woman in America, that I can't protect you from everything, no matter how much money I have." He met her eyes. He's not wrong. The vulnerability in his admission made her throat tight. "You're thinking about that? About what it means long term?" "Every minute," Beck said quietly. "I think about how people look at you, how they'll look at us together, the assumptions they'll make, the comments they'll whisper. I think about whether my presence in your life makes things harder or easier, whether loving you is selfish or—" "Loving me?" Cassie interrupted, the words stopping her breath. Beck's hand cupped her face. "Yes, loving you. Is that allowed after 2 weeks?" "I don't know," Cassie whispered, her heart hammering. "But if it is, then I'm in trouble too." That evening, Beck took Cassie to his penthouse for the first time. The space was everything she'd expected: 30th floor, panoramic city views, expensive furniture, original art on the walls, but it felt sterile, like a hotel suite rather than a home. "It's beautiful," Cassie said diplomatically, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows. "It's empty," Beck countered, moving to stand beside her. "I bought it because that's what successful people do: acquire real estate, display wealth. But I've never felt at home here. Your place, with your plants and your books and your sketches, that felt like someone actually lived there. This is just where I sleep." Cassie studied him, this complicated man who'd built an empire but couldn't build a home. "You could change it," she suggested, "make it yours." His hand found hers. "Maybe I need help with that." He poured wine, and they settled on his obscenely comfortable sofa. Cassie tucked her legs beneath her, hyper-aware of his proximity, the way his arms stretched along the sofa back, fingers occasionally brushing her shoulder. "Tell me about your family," Beck said. "Marcus is clearly protective. What about your parents?" Cassie took a long sip of wine. "My dad died when I was 12. Heart attack. He was a high school history teacher and he loved his job, but the stress—" She trailed off, old grief surfacing. "My mom raised Marcus and me alone after that. Worked as a nurse, picked up extra shifts to keep us in our same neighborhood, same schools. She wanted us to have stability." "That's why you're so driven," Beck said quietly. "Why you push yourself so hard professionally." "Partly," Cassie agreed, "but also because when you're a black woman in corporate America, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. You're either exceptional or you're evidence that diversity initiatives lower standards. There's no middle ground for mediocrity." Beck's expression tightened with frustration at the injustice, but he didn't offer empty platitudes about how it shouldn't be that way. Cassie appreciated that more than he probably knew. When she excused herself to use the restroom, she passed Beck's bedroom. The door stood ajar, revealing an enormous bed with white linens and absolutely no personal touches. But memory crashed over her anyway: the weight of his body, the taste of his mouth, his hands learning her curves. Her face flushed hot. When she returned to the living room, Beck was watching her with knowing eyes. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. Heat crept up her neck. "Nothing." "Liar." He set down his wineglass and stood, crossing to her with deliberate steps. "Because I've been thinking about that night constantly. How you felt in my arms, how you tasted, how I fell asleep holding you and woke up harder than I've been in my life." His confession was raw, unvarnished. Cassie's breath caught. "Beck." He framed her face with both hands. "I want you, Cassie. Not for show, not because you're convenient. I want you so badly I can barely think straight, but I need you to know, this isn't just physical for me. I'm falling for you, fast and hard and probably stupidly, but I can't seem to stop." The declaration hung between them, terrifying and thrilling. Cassie's hands came up to grip his wrists. "I'm scared," she admitted. "You're a billionaire whose ex-fiancé looks like a supermodel. I'm—" "Everything," Beck interrupted. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for. Smart and strong and so beautiful you make my chest ache. Please don't tell me I'm alone in this." "You're not," Cassie whispered. "You're not alone." The kiss was volcanic, 2 weeks of tension igniting. Beck's control shattered as he pulled her against him, and Cassie matched his intensity, hands fisting in his shirt. They stumbled toward his bedroom, shedding clothes in a trail of expensive fabric and desperation. This time, there was no hesitation. Cassie wanted this, wanted him, wanted to feel chosen and desired and necessary. Beck laid her on his bed with reverent hands, and as the city lights painted patterns on their skin, they came together with an urgency that bordered on desperate. Afterward, tangled in sheets that smelled like him, Cassie felt something shift in her chest, a wall crumbling, a defense falling. Beck's hand traced lazy patterns on her hip, and she turned to find him watching her. "Stay tonight," he said quietly, "and tomorrow, and the next day. I know it's fast, but I don't care. I want you here." Cassie's heart hammered. This was moving at a speed that terrified her practical side. But her heart, her long dormant, carefully guarded heart, was screaming yes. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll stay." 3 weeks into their relationship, the first cracks appeared. Beck's business partner Sam Hamilton called with news. Miranda Wellington's fiancé was involved in a merger Beck's company needed to complete. The deal represented hundreds of jobs and millions in revenue. But Miranda had made it clear she'd torpedo the negotiations unless Beck agreed to a public appearance, a charity gala where both couples would be photographed, proving they were all civilized adults who'd moved past old drama. Beck refused initially, but Sam laid out the stakes with brutal clarity. Employees depending on this deal to keep their jobs, investors who'd already committed capital based on the merger going through, competitors circling like sharks if Armstrong Technologies showed any weakness. "It's one night," Sam argued over speakerphone while Beck paced his office. "Smile for cameras, exchange pleasantries, then never deal with her again. Don't let your personal feelings destroy what we've built." Beck reluctantly agreed, but calling Cassie to explain felt like swallowing glass. They met at her apartment, and the moment he started talking, he watched her face go carefully blank, the expression she wore in hostile boardrooms. "So you need to attend a gala with your ex-fiancé," Cassie said, her voice professionally neutral, "for business." "It's business, not personal," Beck insisted, hating how defensive he sounded. "I'll barely speak to her. You can come—" "Can I?" Cassie interrupted. "Or will I? Because there's a difference, Beck. Are you inviting me as your partner? Or are you going to ask me to sit home while you play nice with the woman who humiliated you?" The question exposed the issue he'd been avoiding. "I want you there," he said. "Of course I want you there." "Do you?" Her eyes were too bright. "Because this is the first time you've invited me to anything in your professional world. We've been sneaking around in private for 3 weeks, meeting at restaurants where you reserve private rooms, staying at each other's apartments. But God forbid anyone from your circles sees us together outside that one wedding." The accusation landed like a punch. "You think I'm hiding you?" Cassie stood, arms wrapped around herself. "I think you haven't thought about what it means to be with me publicly. The stares, the whispers, people like Miranda making comments about your surprising new taste, your investors questioning your judgment. Beck, I've been the diversity hire who had to prove herself 1,000 times. I won't be the diversity girlfriend you keep separate from your real life." Her pain was visceral and completely valid. Beck realized with horrible clarity that his desire for privacy, to protect what they had from scrutiny, read as shame to her, as relegating her to the shadows. "I'm not hiding you," he said, crossing to her. "I'm protecting what we have from people who will try to destroy it." "You can't protect me from the world," Cassie said, her voice breaking. "Marcus tried to tell you that. You either stand beside me in the light, have me on your arm at every event that matters, or we're just pretending again. And I can't do pretend anymore, Beck. I need real or I need nothing." The ultimatum hung between them. Beck's privilege showed in his assumption that he could compartmentalize, keep Cassie safe in their private bubble while maintaining his professional image. But she was right. There was no middle ground. "Come to the gala," he said, "on my arm, as my girlfriend. Let me show everyone that you're not my secret." You're my choice. Chapter 3. The week before the gala, Cassie's anxiety built like a pressure system. Kennedy helped her shop, eventually finding a deep sapphire gown that made Cassie's skin glow and her curves look like art. "You're going to break the internet," Kennedy declared, but Cassie's mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios. Her mother visited the night before, finding Cassie pacing her apartment. Tasha studied her daughter with knowing eyes. "You're afraid," Cassie nodded. "Everyone will be watching, judging whether I'm good enough for Beck Armstrong's world, whether I'm too much or not enough or the wrong everything." Tasha took her hands. "Baby, you've been good enough since the day you were born. The question isn't whether you're good enough for his world. It's whether he's good enough for yours. Don't shrink yourself for any man, no matter how many zeros are in his bank account." The day of the gala, Beck sent his stylist despite Cassie's protests that she could manage. When he arrived to pick her up, his reaction made every moment of anxiety worthwhile. He stood frozen in her doorway, eyes roving over her with undisguised hunger. Cassie, just her name, reverent and desperate. She did a slow turn, the gown's fabric catching light. "Will I do?" He crossed to her in 3 strides, hands settling on her waist. "You'll do significantly more than that. Every man there will envy me." He kissed her carefully to avoid disturbing her makeup, but she felt his restraint, the desire coiled tight in his body. In the elevator down to his car, the space felt too small, the air too charged. His hand found hers, squeezing. "Whatever happens tonight, we face it together." The gala was at the Museum of Contemporary Art, dripping with wealth and influence. Camera flashes exploded as they arrived, and Beck's hand was firm on her lower back, guiding her through the chaos with the ease of someone who'd navigated these events for years. Inside, heads turned. Cassie saw the moment people recognized Beck, then noticed her, the calculations happening behind polite smiles, the surprised looks, some welcoming, others coolly assessing. She'd faced hostile rooms before, but never while wearing her heart this vulnerably on her sleeve. Miranda Wellington held court near the bar, stunning in crimson silk that probably cost more than Cassie's monthly rent. When she spotted Beck and Cassie, something dark flashed across her perfect features before the mask of civility returned. She glided over with her fiancé in tow, the silver-haired businessman whose company Beck needed for the merger. "Beck," Miranda said, her voice crystalline, "how domestic of you to bring a date." Her gaze raked over Cassie with barely concealed disdain. "Though I suppose everyone deserves an adventure before settling down." Before Cassie could formulate a response that wouldn't cause a scene, Beck stepped forward. His voice carried to the clusters of people nearby, and Cassie realized he'd chosen his volume deliberately. "Miranda, I'd like you to meet Cassie Nicholson, my girlfriend. Cassie is a senior marketing executive and brilliant strategist. She's also the kindest, most authentic person I've ever known. Everything I should have valued from the start, but was too blind to see until she walked into my life." The public claim silenced nearby conversations. Miranda's face tightened, her polished facade cracking. "How progressive of you, Beck," she said, the condescension clear. "I didn't realize you were so committed to diversity initiatives in your personal life as well as your professional." The racist implication made Cassie's stomach clench, but she'd dealt with women like Miranda countless times. She faced her with the composure she'd perfected in 1,000 hostile meetings. "Thank you for noticing Beck's commitment to authentic connection over superficial status markers," Cassie said, her tone professional and sharp as glass. "Progressive values suit him far better than clinging to outdated social hierarchies based on nothing but inherited wealth and racism. I'm sure you understand, given how you've evolved as well." She glanced meaningfully at Miranda's much older fiancé, and the implication was clear. Miranda had her own practical arrangement. The surrounding crowd barely suppressed laughter. Miranda's face flushed with anger before she stalked away, her fiancé trailing behind with an expression that suggested he'd witnessed his merger deal becoming significantly more complicated. Beck stared at Cassie with wonder and barely restrained desire. "That was magnificent," he murmured. "Absolutely magnificent." Cassie was shaking but exhilarated. "I'm tired of women like her making me feel less than. If I'm going to be in your world, I'll do it on my terms." The rest of the evening, Beck barely left her side. His hand stayed at her waist, his attention focused on her even when important business contacts approached. People noticed the way he looked at her, the casual intimacy between them, how he introduced her as his partner rather than just his date. When they danced, it was different from the wedding. This time, everyone was watching, and Beck seemed determined to make a statement. Pulled her closer than society dancing typically allowed, his hand splayed possessively across her lower back. "You're causing a scene," Cassie murmured, though she made no move to increase the distance between them. "Good," Beck replied, his mouth near her ear. "Let them talk. Let them see that I'm completely gone for you." His words made her dizzy with want. Later, stealing a moment in the coat check, Beck pinned her against the wall for a kiss that left her lipstick smudged and her body aching. "I want to take you home and peel that dress off slowly," he whispered against her neck. "But first we have to survive dessert." By the time they left, Cassie's phone was flooded with notifications. Photos of them were everywhere, dancing, laughing, Beck looking at her like she was the only person in the room. The headlines ranged from supportive to sensational to ugly, but Beck took her hand. "Whatever they say, it doesn't change what's real between us." At his penthouse, finally alone, the night's adrenaline crashed into something else. Beck helped her out of her heels, hands lingering on her ankles, then her calves, his touch reverent. "You were incredible tonight," he said, looking up at her from where he knelt. "Strong and brilliant and so beautiful I couldn't think straight." Cassie threaded her fingers through his hair. "Take me to bed, Beck. No more waiting, no more walls." He rose, lifting her in his arms, and carried her to his bedroom. This time, there was no hesitation from either of them. They came together with an intensity born of weeks of building tension, of dancing around what they both wanted, of finally being ready to surrender completely. Beck undressed her slowly, despite his earlier promise of patience gone, his hands trembling slightly as he revealed her body inch by inch. "You're exquisite," he murmured against her skin. "Every curve, every line, absolutely exquisite." Cassie pulled him down to her, eliminating all space between them. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me how you see me." What followed was both passionate and tender, Beck worshipping her body while Cassie traced the scars on his heart with gentle fingers. They moved together with an urgency that bordered on desperate, but underneath was something deeper: trust, vulnerability, the terrifying leap of letting someone see you completely. When they finally joined, it felt like coming home. Beck's forehead pressed to hers, bodies moving in perfect synchronization. "I love you," he said, the words torn from somewhere deep. "God help me. I love you." Cassie's response was half sob, half laugh. "I love you too, even when you're an overwhelming, overprotective idiot." Afterward, tangled in sheets with city lights painting patterns on their skin, they talked about everything. The future they were afraid to hope for, the obstacles they'd face, the ways they'd have to fight for what they were building. "Your world is going to push back," Cassie said quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "Tonight was just the beginning." "Let it push," Beck said, his arms tightening around her. "I'm not letting you go." The following week proved him wrong about how hard the pushback would be. 3 of Beck's conservative investors requested meetings to discuss his personal brand. One explicitly mentioned concerns about controversial relationship choices affecting company optics and shareholder value. Beck was furious, ready to tell them all exactly where they could put their concerns, but Sam Hamilton urged caution. "These men control significant capital," Sam said during an emergency meeting. "You can't alienate them during the merger. We're talking about hundreds of millions in committed funds, Beck. Be smart about this." Meanwhile, Cassie faced her own challenges. A major client hinted that her high-profile relationship might be distracting from professional focus. Her boss suggested she lay low until the media attention died down. The message was clear. Her visibility as Beck Armstrong's girlfriend was becoming a professional liability. The pressure built from all sides. Beck's business partner questioned whether the relationship was worth the financial risk. Cassie's career advancement stalled as colleagues whispered about whether she was really as competent as they'd thought, or if she was just well-connected now. Anonymous messages flooded both their inboxes, some supportive, many viciously racist and sexist. Cassie received a letter at her office suggesting she was using her sexuality to climb social ladders and giving black women a bad name. The words cut deep, triggering years of internalized doubt about whether she truly belonged in elite spaces or if she'd just gotten lucky. Her mother called after hearing the strain in Cassie's voice during their weekly check-in. "Baby, is this man worth what you're going through?" Cassie wanted to say yes immediately but found herself hesitating. "I love him, Mama, but I'm exhausted from defending our relationship to everyone, to his world, to my world, sometimes even to myself." Tasha's sigh was heavy with recognition. "Your father and I faced similar struggles, just different circumstances. Love across divides requires both people to be all in all the time. The question is he?" Beck's business partner Sam requested a private meeting. They'd been friends since college, and Sam had stood by Beck through the Miranda debacle. His loyalty made his words carry weight. "I need to know if this relationship is worth potentially losing the merger, alienating key investors, and possibly damaging the company we built together," Sam said bluntly. "I'm not saying walk away from her. I'm asking if you're prepared for the real costs, not romantic notions about love conquering all, but actual financial and professional consequences." Beck stared at his friend. "You're asking me to choose between my business and Cassie." "I'm asking if you understand what you're choosing," Sam corrected. "Because the merger is hanging by a thread. Miranda's fiancé is using your relationship as leverage, and our conservative investors are getting cold feet. You could lose everything we've built." For the first time, Beck truly confronted what being with Cassie meant, potentially losing the company he'd built from nothing, disappointing employees who depended on him, facing his own privilege and the ways his world was actively hostile to the woman he loved. The easy path was visible. End things with Cassie, cite mutual decision, and wanting different things, return to dating women his investors found acceptable. The thought made him physically ill, but so did the idea of dragging Cassie through prolonged scrutiny that might break her. When Beck finally saw Cassie after days of silence while he wrestled with these decisions, she knew something was wrong the moment he walked into her apartment. The shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he couldn't quite meet her gaze. "Talk to me," Cassie urged, her stomach knotting with dread. Beck paced, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "What if I'm being selfish, asking you to endure this scrutiny because I can't let you go?" Cassie's heart dropped. "Are you breaking up with me?" "No." The word came fast and desperate. "God, no. But maybe I should be. Maybe you deserve someone whose life doesn't come with this much baggage, someone who can give you peace instead of constant battle." Fury surged through her. She crossed to him, hands fisting in his shirt. Don't you dare make this decision for me. Don't decide what I can or can't handle." "I can't lose you," Beck said, his voice cracking, "but I can't watch you suffer because of me either." Have you ever been in a relationship where someone kept you separate from their real life? Where love felt genuine in private but invisible in public? Tell me in the comments how you navigated that painful space between being chosen and being hidden. And subscribe to see how Cassie and Beck face this impossible crossroads. "Then fight for us," Cassie demanded. "Stop trying to protect me and start trusting me to make my own choices. I'm not fragile, Beck. I'm tired of men assuming I need protecting rather than partnership." The words broke through his paralysis. He kissed her hard, pouring weeks of fear and frustration into the contact. She responded with equal intensity, proving through touch what words couldn't convey, that she wasn't going anywhere. The next day, Marcus showed up at Beck's office unannounced. His presence filled the space, and Beck instinctively stood, recognizing a reckoning when he saw one. "My sister loves you," Marcus said without preamble. "Which means I need to know, are you going to let outside pressure destroy what you have, or are you going to be the man she believes you are?" Beck met his gaze. "I'm terrified of failing her, of not being enough to protect her from what my world will throw at her." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Good. Fear means you understand what's at stake. But let me tell you something about Cassie. She survived in rooms that didn't want her there for years. She doesn't need you to shield her from the world. She needs you to stand beside her and fight with her, not for her." The distinction clicked into place. Beck had been so focused on protecting Cassie that he'd inadvertently made her passive in their own story. How do I fix this? Marcus's smile was grim. You start by making choices that prove she's your priority, not your problem to solve. You show her through action, not just words, that you choose her every single day. Chapter 4. That evening, Miranda Wellington herself called Beck. Her voice dripped poisonous honey. The merger falls through tomorrow unless you make a public statement distancing yourself from that woman. Charles won't sign otherwise. It's very simple, Beck. Choose your company or your diversity experiment. The racist language finally crystallized everything for Beck. His voice turned to ice. Her name is Cassie, and you can tell Charles the merger is off. I don't do business with bigots, and I don't negotiate my personal life. Miranda's shock was audible. You're throwing away millions. I'm choosing what matters, Beck interrupted. Something you never understood. Lose my number, Miranda, permanently. When Beck told Sam about torpedoing the merger, his partner's face fell. You're really willing to lose everything we built? Beck shook his head. Not everything, just the parts that require me to compromise who I am. If our investors can't accept Cassie, they can't accept me either. We'll find new investors, new partners, build something better. But I won't find another Cassie. Sam studied him for a long moment before his expression softened. You really love her. More than I knew I could love anyone, Beck admitted. Sam sighed, then extended his hand. Then I guess we're rebuilding, again. You're going to owe me significantly more equity for this. The following week, Cassie was honored at an industry awards dinner for a groundbreaking campaign. Beck attended, sitting at a separate table due to seating arrangements made months prior. Throughout the evening, his eyes never left her. When Cassie accepted her award, speaking eloquently about representation and authentic storytelling, pride surged through Beck so powerfully it was almost painful. She was brilliant, commanding the room with confidence and grace that came from years of proving herself in spaces that didn't want her. During cocktails afterward, they maintained professional distance despite the magnetic pull between them. But in a quiet corridor, when Cassie stepped away to take a call, Beck followed. The moment they were alone, he pulled her into an alcove, kissing her with barely restrained hunger. I'm so proud of you, he murmured against her lips, and so desperate to take you home and show you exactly how much. Cassie's laugh was breathless. We're supposed to be networking. His hand slid to her hip, possessive and warm. I don't care about networking. I care about getting you alone. Her phone buzzed, her boss looking for her. Reality intruded. Beck released her reluctantly, straightening her dress with touches that promised more later. Tonight, she said. Definitely tonight. But tonight brought a different kind of reckoning. Late that evening, Cassie received an email. She'd been passed over for a promotion she'd been virtually guaranteed. The explanation was vague, but between the lines, the message was clear. Her high-profile relationship had made her controversial. Her professional advancement was being sacrificed on the altar of other people's discomfort. Beck found her crying in her apartment, and rage nearly blinded him. I'll call your CEO. I'll make this right. No, Cassie cut him off sharply. That's exactly the problem. You can't fix everything with money or influence. This is my career, my reputation. If you intervene, it proves I only succeed because of my connections to you. The argument that followed laid bare their deepest fears. Beck's need to fix and protect clashed with Cassie's need for agency and independence. I love you, Beck said desperately. Let me help. I love you too, Cassie responded, tears streaming. But I'm losing myself trying to be strong enough for your world, while proving I'm not with you for your money and mine. I don't know how to do this anymore. The confession hung heavy. Beck's face drained of color. What are you saying? Cassie wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of her apartment. I'm saying maybe everyone is right. Maybe we're from worlds too different to reconcile. Maybe love isn't enough when the cost of being together is losing who we are separately. Beck moved to her, gathering her trembling body against his. Don't say that. Please don't say that. But Cassie was breaking from weeks of pressure, and the sobs came harsh and painful. He held her through it, stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances he wasn't sure he believed. When she finally quieted, exhausted, he carried her to bed. She was too drained to protest. He removed her shoes, covered her with a blanket, and lay beside her fully clothed. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. "Not tonight, not ever. We'll figure this out." But Cassie's eyes were closed, and he didn't know if she heard him. He stayed awake through the night, watching her sleep fitfully, cataloging every detail of her face as if memorizing it against future loss. By dawn, a plan had formed, desperate, potentially disastrous, but the only path he could see forward. Beck called Sam at 6 in the morning. "I need you to arrange something." When he explained, Sam was silent for a long moment. "That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or complete professional suicide." "Probably both," Beck said. "Do it anyway." Next, he called Marcus. "I need to talk to your mother and your whole family if possible. Today." Marcus's protective instincts flared. "What did you do?" "Nothing yet," Beck said, "but I'm about to do something that will either prove I'm worthy of your sister or prove everyone right that I'm not." After that painful night, Beck and Cassie agreed they needed space, an indefinite break to figure out their individual lives before trying to merge them. It was mature, rational, and absolutely devastating. They'd been together 3 months, but it felt like losing a limb. Cassie threw herself into work with renewed intensity. 2 months after their break, new leadership took over her company, and she finally received the promotion that had been denied. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow. Success meant nothing without someone to share it with, and every achievement felt empty without Beck's proud smile. Beck restructured his entire business, severing ties with investors who'd expressed concerns about his relationship. He sold his stake in companies run by people who couldn't see past their prejudice. It cost him hundreds of millions and alienated people who'd been business associates for years, but it freed him in ways he hadn't expected. 6 months after the wedding where they had met, Jade Montgomery's baby shower was in full swing, a garden party celebrating impending motherhood. Cassie had volunteered to help set up, grateful for the distraction from the hollow ache that had become her constant companion. She was arranging gift bags when Kennedy grabbed her arm. "Don't freak out, but Beck Armstrong just walked into the backyard." Cassie's heart stopped. She turned slowly, and there he was, looking thinner, tired, but still impossibly handsome in dark jeans and a crisp white shirt. Their eyes met across the garden, and the air charged with everything left unsaid. What Cassie didn't know was that Beck had requested a private audience with her family an hour before the shower. In Tasha Nicholson's living room, he faced Cassie's mother, brother, aunts, and grandmother, a tribunal more intimidating than any boardroom. "Thank you for seeing me," Beck had begun, hands clasped to hide their trembling. "I know I don't deserve your time after how things ended with Cassie, but I need you to understand something. I love your daughter, and I've spent 6 months proving, to myself and anyone who matters, that she's my priority." Marcus had crossed his arms. "Talk is cheap. What have you actually done?" Beck pulled out his phone, showing them articles and press releases. "I dissolved partnerships with every investor who expressed concerns about my relationship with Cassie. I sold my stake in companies run by people who couldn't see past their prejudice. I restructured my entire business to align with my values rather than convenience." Tasha's eyebrows had risen. "That must have cost you significantly." "Hundreds of millions," Beck admitted, "and it was worth every penny because it freed me to be the man Cassie deserves, someone whose actions match his words." Cassie's grandmother, Eloise, at 86, had spoken for the first time. "You're a wealthy white man who built an empire. Why should we believe you understand what it means to love a black woman in this country?" Beck had met her gaze directly. "I can't fully understand, Mrs. Nicholson, but I can listen, learn, and stand beside Cassie when she faces those challenges. I've spent 6 months in intensive conversations with cultural educators, attending workshops on being an effective ally and partner. Not to check boxes, but because I need to understand the world Cassie navigates daily." He'd pulled out a folder. "I've also established a foundation, in Cassie's name, though she doesn't know, supporting black women in architecture and marketing. Because she once told me she switched careers partly because she was tired of being the only one in rooms that didn't want her there. I can't change the past, but I can help build a different future. Marcus had leaned forward. What happens when it gets hard again? When staying with my sister costs you opportunities? Then I lose opportunities, Beck had said firmly. I've rebuilt my business before. I can do it again. But there's only one Cassie. Now, at the baby shower, Jade wadded over to Beck, very pregnant and glowing. Beck, I'm so glad you could make it. Her eyes darted between him and Cassie, clearly aware of the tension. Beck managed a smile. Congratulations, you look radiant. But his eyes had found Cassie again, and the hunger in his gaze made her knees weak. She forced herself to focus on the gift bags, but her hands trembled as she tied ribbons. For 20 minutes, they orbited each other at the party, never quite in the same space, but hyper-aware of every movement. Finally, Jade physically pushed them together. You two need to talk. You're making everyone uncomfortable. She wadded away before either could protest. Silence stretched. Finally, Beck spoke. You look beautiful. Cassie's laugh was bitter. Beck, don't. I can't do pleasantries when just looking at you hurts. He nodded. Then let me be honest. These 6 months without you have been hell. I wake up reaching for you. I see things I want to tell you about and pick up my phone before remembering I can't. Everything feels gray without you in it. Cassie's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. That's not fair. You can't just show up after 6 months and... I talked to your family, he interrupted. She went still. What? I asked them to hear me out, to let me explain what I've done, who I'm trying to become. Beck's hands clenched at his sides. Because Cassie, I can't do this without you, but I couldn't ask you to come back to the same situation we left. Before she could respond, Beck raised his voice, addressing the entire party. Conversation stopped. All eyes turned to them. Cassie's face burned with embarrassment and confusion. I'm sorry to interrupt, Beck said, not sounding sorry at all. But I need to do something and it can't wait. He turned to Tasha, sitting with relatives. Mrs. Nicholson, 6 months ago you asked me if I was willing to stand beside your daughter publicly. I didn't have a good answer then. I hope I do now. He pulled out his phone, and Kennedy materialized with a tablet, clearly in on whatever this was. On screen appeared a press release. Cassie read the words with growing disbelief. Beck Armstrong, CEO of Armstrong Technologies, announces major corporate restructuring to align with equity and inclusion values. In partnership with the Cassie Nicholson Foundation for Women in Architecture and Marketing, Armstrong Technologies commits $500 million over 5 years to supporting underrepresented professionals. Her hand flew to her mouth. Beck, what did you do? He faced her fully, voice steady despite their audience. I restructured my entire professional life around what matters: integrity, equity, and you. I can't undo the mistakes I made, but I can build something better going forward. Beck didn't kneel. Instead, he took both her hands. I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. I know we have work to do, trust to rebuild, but I'm asking you to give us another chance, to let me prove I've learned and changed, that I choose you, not just in private, but everywhere that matters. Tears streamed down Cassie's face. You're insane. You restructured your entire company? It needed restructuring anyway, Beck said. You just gave me the courage to do it right. The foundation? Beck, that's too much. It's not enough, he interrupted. Nothing I do will ever be enough to deserve you. But I'm going to spend my life trying anyway, if you'll let me. Around them, her family watched. Tasha was tearful. Marcus looked cautiously approving. Eloise nodded with satisfaction. Cassie looked at this man who'd dismantled his empire for her, who'd faced her family's judgment, who was standing before everyone she loved and claiming her without reservation. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, you absolute fool. Yes to second chances. Yes to building something real. Beck's smile transformed his face. He pulled her close, kissing her as applause erupted around them. The kiss tasted like salt and promise, like coming home after a long journey through wilderness. When they broke apart, breathless, Cassie whispered against his lips, You know my family's going to be in our business constantly now. Beck's laugh rumbled through his chest. I'm counting on it. Kennedy appeared with champagne. Okay, now that you two have finished your dramatic reunion, can we focus on Jade's baby shower? Everyone laughed, but Beck kept Cassie tucked against his side, unwilling to let her go. As the party continued, they stole moments alone in Jade's rose garden. Away from curious eyes, touches became urgent. "I missed you," Cassie breathed between kisses. "Missed this, missed us." Beck's hands mapped her body like he was relearning beloved territory. "Come home with me tonight. Let me show you how much I've missed you." The invitation was loaded with promise. Cassie nodded, beyond words. That evening, at Beck's penthouse, which now featured personal touches everywhere, including framed photos of them together and art Cassie had once admired, they finally came together again after months of separation. This time, there was no urgency born of desperation. Instead, they explored each other slowly, reverently, like precious rediscoveries. Beck undressed her with worshipful hands, murmuring against her skin about how he'd memorized every curve during their separation, how he'd dreamed of this moment. Cassie traced the new lines stress had carved on his face, the weight he'd lost, feeling fierce protective love surge through her. "Never again," she whispered. "Never walk away from me again." "Never," Beck promised. When they finally joined, it was with a completeness that transcended physical connection. Beck's forehead pressed to hers, bodies moving in perfect synchronization. "I love you," he said. "Every complicated, brilliant, strong part of you." Cassie's response was half sob, half laugh. "I love you too. Even when you're an overwhelming idiot who restructures companies to prove a point." Their release was emotional as much as physical, a letting go of months of tension, fear, and longing. Afterward, tangled in sheets with city lights painting patterns on their skin, they talked about the future. Not in grand gestures, but in small, important details. "Whose apartment do we live in?" Cassie asked, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "Both agree mine needs personality, yours needs space," Beck said. "So maybe we find something new. Build a home together from the beginning." "Sunday dinners with my family," Cassie warned, "every week." "I want that," Beck said seriously. "All of it, the interrogations, the unsolicited advice, the sense of belonging to something bigger than myself." Cassie shifted to look at him. "You really mean that?" "I really do," he confirmed. "You taught me that love isn't about protecting someone from the world. It's about building a world together worth living in." 9 months later, Cassie stood in their new home, a renovated brownstone they'd chosen together, filled with both their histories and their shared future. Photos of family gatherings covered the mantel. Art they'd selected side by side adorned the walls. Plants thrived everywhere because Cassie insisted, and Beck had discovered he actually enjoyed caring for living things. Beck emerged from his home office, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "What are you thinking about?" Cassie leaned into him. "About that wedding. Sitting alone, feeling invisible, convinced I'd always be the woman people respected. But never chose." Beck turned her to face him. "And now?" His eyes held everything: love, commitment, partnership. Cassie's smile was radiant. "Now I know that being chosen isn't about someone rescuing you from loneliness. It's about finding someone brave enough to stand beside you in the light, with all the messy complications that come with it." He kissed her softly. "For what it's worth, I think I was the one who got rescued that night." Outside their window, the city glittered with possibility. Inside, they'd built something real, not perfect, but authentic. A love that survived scrutiny because it was rooted in mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to fight for what mattered. 2 weeks later, Beck took Cassie to the same restaurant where they had had their first real date. The private room was decorated simply: candles, flowers, the understated elegance Beck had learned she preferred. Over dessert, he reached across the table for her hand. "I told you 6 months ago I wasn't asking you to marry me, that we had work to do first." Cassie's heart began to pound. "I remember." "We've done the work," Beck said quietly. "We've fought and made up and learned how to be partners instead of trying to protect each other. We've built a home together, integrated our lives, survived your grandmother's interrogations and my mother's anxious hovering. We've proven to ourselves and everyone else that this is real." He slid from his chair and knelt beside her. From his pocket, he produced a small box. "Cassie Nicholson, you made me visible when I felt like a walking bank account. You challenged me to be better, do better, Live according to my values instead of convenience. You're my best friend, my partner, my home. Will you marry me?" Cassie was crying openly now, not caring about her makeup or the mascara undoubtedly streaming down her face. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring was perfect, a sapphire the color of her gala dress surrounded by diamonds, unique and beautiful, and so perfectly her that she knew Beck had put thought into every detail. He slipped it on her finger, then pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for choosing me back." "Always," Cassie whispered. "Always and always." Their wedding, 8 months later, was nothing like the elaborate affair Beck had almost endured with Miranda. They married in Tasha's backyard, surrounded by family and close friends. Jade and Kennedy stood up for Cassie. Sam stood with Beck. Marcus walked Cassie down the aisle, and when he placed her hand in Beck's, he whispered, "You hurt her. I hurt you." Beck squeezed his soon-to-be brother-in-law's shoulder. "Understood. And thank you for the threat and the trust." The ceremony was simple, their vows personal and honest. Beck promised to stand beside her in the light, to fight with her instead of for her, to build a partnership based on trust instead of protection. Promised to let him in even when vulnerability terrified her, to remember they were stronger together than apart, to choose him every day. When they kissed as husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheers. Beck lifted her slightly off the ground, and Cassie laughed against his mouth, pure joy, unrestrained and beautiful. At the reception, Beck's parents danced with Cassie's mother, comparing stories about their stubborn children. Marcus and Sam discovered a shared love of terrible action movies and spent an hour debating which franchise was superior. Jade bounced her 6-month-old daughter on her hip while Kennedy took enough photos to fill 10 albums. As the sun set and string lights illuminated the garden, Beck found Cassie standing alone for a moment, watching their families mingle. "Remember when you said you felt invisible at weddings?" he asked, sliding an arm around her waist. Cassie turned in his embrace. "I was sitting alone, watching everyone else's happiness, wondering if I'd ever have my own." "And now?" Beck asked. Cassie looked around at their celebration, not elaborate or expensive, but filled with genuine love and hard-won joy. "Now I have more than I knew to hope for. A partner who sees me. A family that's expanded to include his. A future I get to build instead of wondering if it will ever arrive." Beck kissed her forehead. "I'm the luckiest man alive." "No," Cassie corrected, reaching up to cup his face. "We're both lucky, because we found each other when we both felt invisible, and we made each other seen. Sometimes the best love stories start when you stop looking for someone to complete you and start looking for someone willing to grow alongside you. Messy, complicated, beautifully real." As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Cassie caught sight of her reflection in the patio doors. She saw what Beck had seen that night at the wedding 6 years ago, a woman who was brilliant, strong, beautiful, and worthy of being chosen first, not despite her complications, but because of them. Beck whispered in her ear, "What are you thinking?" "That I'm grateful for every moment that led me to that wedding reception, sitting alone, because it brought me to you." Beck's arms tightened around her. "Best favor I ever asked. Best favor I ever agreed to," Cassie replied. Around them, their families celebrated. 2 worlds that had learned to blend, 2 histories creating a shared future, 2 people who'd been brave enough to fight for love even when the world pushed back. And in that backyard garden, under string lights and stars, they danced. Have you ever felt invisible until someone truly saw you? Have you found love that required you both to grow, change, and fight for what you'd built together? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences inspire these stories. Where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if Beck and Cassie's journey touched your heart, and subscribe to Dear Love Diaries for more stories about love that transforms us. Tomorrow brings another tale about finding connection in unexpected places. Until then, remember, the right person doesn't just see you, they stand beside you so the whole world sees you too. Thank you for being part of this community. You mean everything.